Howdy, all you delicious people. I am here today to review Gleipnir, which I hope I'm pronouncing that right because I could probably be pronouncing it all kinds of wrong. Ultimately, that is the way of which that I would like to pronounce it, so hopefully that's correct. So going into this anime, I thought that this anime honestly was really, really refreshing. So, for a lot of people that ultimately don't know, at some points in time, I would talk about anime on here. Not all the time, and every once in a while, a lot of times, some videos will probably just make their way over here that are covered with anime, probably like a My Hero Academia or some other things that ultimately I just don't want to go out of my way to entirely review all over again, um, and pretend as if they're new videos because they're not. I just don't want to do that kind of legwork all over again, just to have to watch certain, like, there was one My Hero Academia season that I watched 26 episodes, and I'm never going to do that kind of thing again. So, when going into this, I watched a portion of this season. I watched the first three episodes just to kind of get a real understanding of what is going on in this show. To me, I think the first episode doesn't exactly sell you on exactly what's going on, but there is some interesting things here already within the first episode, but we'll get there. I thought that this show was fairly reminiscent of a movie that I had seen called Star Kid. So if you've never heard of that movie, because probably you haven't, go ahead and probably check that out. I think currently into the second it's recording, the movie Star Kid I think is in Hulu, but I could be wrong about that. Go ahead and Google it if you'd like. But ultimately, like, yeah, like, this is to me like a very much more like adult-ish like version of the movie Star Kid. Like in the movie Star Kid, we ultimately have it to where the human that is inside this alien ultimately at some point in the movie needed to pee, and the alien that had a kid inside of him like didn't understand the concept of how this person could pee, and so ultimately we had to have the human explain it to him. But that is kind of not the approach of this show. It's not the exact same thing. So here is the thing that I will do. I'm going to kind of tee up this show for people that don't quite understand via maybe the trailers, the visuals, what is going on, and then eventually you could otherwise justify whether you want to watch this show or not. And where could you go and do so? Well, currently, at the second this recording, I have been downloading an app called 9 Anime, and I've been watching a lot of anime, or quite recently, this anime here, Gleipnir, through 9 Anime. So that's a free place to where you can go and take as much time as you want to go and find as many numerous animes for absolutely free. I would probably also go through, I think there was like Anime Primes and Anime Bogos, but ultimately 9 Anime has been very reliable for me recently, and it's been free for me recently. So there's no fee, there's nothing like that. You can consistently see anime for absolutely free in any way that you want to see it. Ultimately, I don't know what kind of full range of options that they have on this app, but dare in fact, I hope it just keeps rolling so ultimately I could just watch anime for free. Which is great. So, what is Gleipnir? Gleipnir ultimately is like, to me, it's kind of like, I would call it almost like a Ghost Rider show if you have to have somebody inside of Ghost Rider along with Ghost Rider already existing kind of thing. It's kind of a weird, bizarre concept. So, here's the kind of the broken down approach of this. So we end up having it to where a kid ultimately senses something going on and feels that he has to jump in like a hero. But we end up having this kid transform into this mascotted wolf character consistently. And so we end up finding out that it seems that there is one girl who I will talk about in spoilers, ultimately ties herself into finding out the secret of this mascotted person, but then uh, all while understanding this whole monster, she ends up realizing that seemingly in the back of this monster's uh, mascotish like figure, we otherwise realize that he is to have a zipper on the back of his back. So we end up having it to where this girl undoes the zipper and she otherwise just pretty much just takes off all of her clothes basically and dips herself inside of this mascot to where both um, uh, sh- Shunichi, I believe is his name, and Claire ultimately are to perform tasks as one being, as one thing. We ultimately have it to where seemingly Claire has the combat side, where ultimately Shunichi is the vessel, or is the otherwise seemingly, like, for example, like Claire is basically the Power Ranger going into the Megazord, for an analogy. But when looking at it, this guy is just a guy that bizarrely transforms into this mascot figure that seemingly has no host body within it. Like basically, like it's kind of like a Marvel Venom in a sense, where recently you have it to where like there's so many layers of this onion, where it's like if the symbiote could ultimately become a actual person, but then also become the symbiote, and then Eddie Brock would walk into the symbiote and all become one. And so we have it to our reasonably like I would call this like one of those shows where you have it to where like if Iron Man had like a walking talking Iron Man suit, kind of like when he does in Iron Man 3, Jarvis when Jarvis goes inside the Iron Man suit. Like it kind of feels like that in a lot of ways. Just a leisurely like hey, like but we consistently have it to where ultimately it seems like Shunichi is very shy around this girl, but Claire is not shy at all. Like basically she is just quite easily just wanting to consistently be inside this monster and consistently wanting to, because it's hot out, uh go into basically just taking everything off, and we end up having Torshinichi's like, no, like if anything, like it's weird. It's gonna feel weird to have a woman of sorts going in and fully fledgedly being like. I think there is probably just some censorship thing really going on with this show, hence why they didn't actually go the route that they do. But who knows within other episodes, and then quite a bit of times there seems to be some censorship going on with this show. So you can kind of obviously see that in points and junctures within these three episodes. So I think really for the most of the point, the story feels very simplistic. I'm waiting for complications to eventually emerge because it kind of seems like a slow progression. I am. I do think that eventually I will grow to really enjoy this show. I think is what I think will quite possibly happen. It's just like if anything, there's a lot of like it's a lot of it's a slow going show, and there's a lot of stuff that is kind of like, okay, this seems kind of out of the normal. This kind of feels out of the ordinary to have this be going on within the show. I'm like, not that there's a bad thing about it. It's just the fact that it's like it's a different kind of approach. It's a different kind of spin to an anime, and I just kind of think it's like, well, that's kind of interesting to just see a quite different thing that I've been usually normally kind of going through every bit of anime and just kind of siphoning through to find bizarre things to go on here. Um, Reasonably, I thought that this show was really different than a lot of animes that I've seen, and visually interesting, as well as it just kind of being Maybe a little bit too simplistic. I don't know. But let's go into ultimately just going into spoilers. So basically, that's the concept. Right now, there isn't much of actual, like, there is kind of fighting going on. It seems like there is stuff that isn't quite 100% explained about how the Shinichi has eventually becomes this monsterish character. I like that isn't really explained. He just kind of wakes up one day and just starts becoming this monster, and that's who he is. We ultimately have it to where seemingly Claire seems to eventually just kind of just find her way into being with this monster, and like we have it to where seemingly there's something about this connection between these two people, and I'm trying to figure it out. Plus, it seems like there is some bizarre coin thing that is going on that doesn't really quite seem to be explained just yet. But yeah, there's something about like it seems like what I think it would probably be is if like let's say there's a leprechaun out there, and this leprechaun is leaving all these gold coins for all these people to touch and accumulate and whatever what have you. And so now we have it to where seemingly everyone is starting to turn into a monster because of these coins. And that's what I'm assessing is currently happening, but I can't be 100% sure about that. I kind of like the fact also that it seems like we have some kind of monster vision going on in here, but but other than that, I think let's go into spoilers because anything further along into here, we'll probably be spoiling it at some point, and then ultimately might not have anything to actually say in these spoiler acts or whatever have you. So let's get into that. So I just thought that this was visually different. I really enjoy it so far. It's a little slow. I think reasonably. I like the approach of this. We have it to where, like, I'm like, thank God we don't have it to where there's not a lot of like I was thinking that I'm like, God, am I just gonna get slammed with a ton of dialogue going on in here? When looking at it, I thought that there was going to be a character that was just going to end up non-stoppingly like thinking in his head, because that's usually a lot of animes where you just have like the main character who's consistently just like ba 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 ba, and so let's ultimately go on into that double five times territory. Again, check 9 anime out without a doubt. It's a free way to say that you've seen anime at this point. If not, then ultimately, can find any other source of means. If you already have Funimation, check that out. Ultimately, that is I think it does have a free trial, but then after that, it's a monthly fee. If ultimately you'll just, if you want to just easier whatever thing that ultimately might just have everything and it's the original source, then go ahead and check that out. But let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil these 3 episodes. So we ultimately have it to where we are to tell the story of Shunichi, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, because if anything, the only way I could remember this character's name was just the fact that it was like he has the most weirdest like American sounding name, maybe in wherever this is from originally. Like it's a normal name, but to me it just sounded like weird. So ultimately, just that's what popped in there. I'm ultimately not going to have IMDb out for really understanding who all the people are. Recently, whatever I got from whatever names is basically whatever I'm going to get. There's going to be some characters that I might just have to describe them just because reasonably I didn't catch their names, or otherwise it's severely difficult to be able to go and try and get all the names of all the characters. So when looking at it, luckily I did this one first of today, or otherwise I probably wouldn't remember half of these names. So going into this, so we ultimately have a showcasing of Shunichi, and we have it to where this character is to showcase that he lives alone, and to showcase that it seems like he is, I would assess he is in high school right now and he's going off to college at some point. So it seems that ultimately he is getting a letter of recommendation to go to a certain school, quite possibly. We seemingly have it showcase within the show that it is, wherever they're at, is really, really hot. Like, people are just like, you can just see just like sweat just glistening off these characters. I'm like, wow, that's a rare thing. I don't see a lot of times where they have to use like weather in a story very often. But like, I think really in this show, the whole weather thing, like the whole aspect of weather, actually works out for this show perfectly. I'm like, it gives a whole reason for why Claire has to do what she has to do to get into, uh, to reasonably get into Shunichi as this monstrous character. I think when I'll do the flipping of the coin, I don't of Shunichi being this alternative character. I think I might just call him like mascot, to ultimately just have it to be an easy way to just be like, okay, well now Shunichi is now mascot, and I'll just call him mascot because ultimately that's basically what he is. He's basically a mascotted sleeve for whoever to go inside of him, which I thought was really interesting. So we have it to where Shunichi is going through a seemingly common day of school. We ultimately have it to where some girl is desperately asking for his paper, I guess, to copy off of him. We ultimately seemingly have Shunichi that is otherwise realizing that this girl had ultimately, when sitting at a certain part of desk, ultimately is almost revealing uh, her upper skirt for everyone to see. And we ultimately have to where Shunichi is just like, I can't look away. And we have it to where this girl ends up clocking Shunichi in the face. End up getting I would assess a broken nose or something. So we end up having it to where Shunichi ends up going and is kind of, I guess, cleaning up the class. We end up having some girl come in and ultimately mention that ultimately she is going to some school. I guess she had gotten a full ride from some school, and it seems like her parents are so proud. She got a text from them going congratulations and so on and so forth. So, because ultimately we are at this academy, because evidently they just call schools academy in Japan, I guess. So, or wherever this is done and done from. So we end up having it to where Shunichi, and I'm not quite sure if I'm even pronouncing that right, because it sounded like like itchy to me. So that's the only way I could remember this name. So going on into here, so we have it to where this character ultimately is going throughout his day, and eventually he is finding seemingly a dead dog off to the off to the side of this school, and we ultimately have it to where Shunichi, I guess, wanted to act and try to maybe rescue this already dead dog, but like he was just like, yeah, don't look at it, don't try to do anything for it, don't try to help it, and whatever, try to move on. So we end up having it to where seemingly after these kids are ultimately showcasing that they're going to have to run a marathon, or like I think like for me, I would normally have to do this thing called run a mile, where it's just like 4 laps around this gigantic course. And immediately I always thought that that was so annoying because I'm like, good God, it seemed like every single year, like the thing that they would make you like run around would just get bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And then also a lot of times, a lot of those uh, like environments and such, like yeah, they were reasonably just like they were the worst like approaches to some schools were just like, man, it's just like, yeah, you're gonna run a mile in like the worst looking like thing to just run a mile at. It's basically just dirt and then like uh and somebody just made a big enough circle to just like, hey, yeah, that's your dirt that you're running around. I thought that was ridiculous. Anyways, so going on into here, so we ultimately have it to where Shunichi eventually is kind of going throughout his day, and ultimately he ends up going out and he ends up seeing a home that is on fire. He ends up going and ultimately noticing that there is a girl that is ultimately on fire, and she seems to be almost disrobed at some point. So we end up having a Shunichi ending up having to forcibly turn into this mascoted, monsterish character, and he ends up going into the home and then he ends up like crashing through a wall to ultimately collect this girl and take her to a safe distance away from this home. You ultimately have it to where it seems that Shunichi and this girl ultimately we realize that Shunichi has immediately having some feelings for this girl, bizarrely. It seems that there is some scent or aroma or some kind of connection that he's immediately having with this girl that is just undeniable, to the point of him almost kind of taking down her underwear to ultimately just kind of and then he just stops himself because he doesn't realize what he's actually doing, and then he runs off. So we ultimately have it to where Shunichi ends up going the next day to try to find where the heck his phone is, and we end up finding out that seemingly this girl named Claire ultimately has his cell phone, and basically she is going to basically be the girl to out this mascoted monster. So we end up having it to ultimately I'm assuming Claire probably burnt her own house down so that way she could have done herself in. Like it seems like there was a little bit of that, but I don't think it's 100% said to be like clear. So like there's some kind of story that we're not quite understanding yet, and I would hope to eventually get there. So we have it to ultimately Shunichi and Claire are to meet on this roof, and we have it to where Shunichi is basically trying to have it to where Claire is ultimately saying like, you didn't actually see what you saw. Like I just think that you were like you were high off of smoke fumes or something like that. Like they're like you were delirious. You were whatever. You were on the edge of death. Like there's no way that you could have actually seen what you saw. So we end up having it to where Claire ends up going, well, okay, well, if you really and truly believe that, or you really want me to truly believe that you are just a normal human being and so on and so forth, we end up having it to where Claire ends up taking the phone and Shunichi ends up walking over seemingly this fenced barrier on this roof, bizarrely, or this railing to ultimately get his phone. We end up having Claire ending up pushing Shunichi off of this building, and we have to where Shunichi ends up turning into a monster to protect himself. Like so, this is kind of almost in a way like Hulk, but we end up having it to where like the Bruce Banner part of it is still in Shunichi. God, I'm making so many like superhero and comic book and whatever references here, just to kind of showcase this whole thing. So we end up having it to where Claire ends up taking a photo of this character, but it's not really quite 100% clear. It's kind of like a Bigfoot picture where it kind of looks kind of distorted a little bit. But anyways, so we have it to where we have Claire ultimately going in here and wanting answers about this monster, about this mascot, and Shunichi has no clue about how he became this. It seems that ultimately Claire had found out that it seems that Shunichi had had some gold coin of sorts, and she ultimately is like, well, hey, like, what is about this coin? What is up with this coin? This coin looks unique. And Shunichi says, I don't know what that is. We ultimately open this show, the pilot episode, with seemingly a person finding some gold coin with a star on it, and it's staticky, which we are to assess that that is some monster, ultimately just not even realizing they are a monster, and are just desperately needing some food, and so ultimately they're putting a coin into a slot, and we end up finding out that there seemingly is some guy who had been seemingly living in bizarrely in a vending machine, and he ends up introducing himself to this what I would assess is a monster. So when looking at that, we have it to where seemingly that we have Claire eventually realizing once Shunichi does change that eventually she notices that there is a zipper in the back of Shunichi's back. She ends up opening it and she ends up going and slipping her body into Shunichi. We end up having it to her reasonably at some point. He ends up forcing her to put on a bathing suit to go inside of him because basically, uh, like it seems like she consistently gets all kinds of like goop and stuff all over her while going in there. Like I think the funny thing when the first time she went into Shinichi's body, she made a joke about that she peed herself, and ultimately it was a joke. So, but we end up having it to where reasonably it seems like there is a girl with some seemingly mask on that is going to try to retrieve this gold coin. And we end up having it to where seemingly this girl is some track star that is to seemingly have like not her entire body but parts of her body like her arms and her legs ultimately start shifting into this like demonic or like I would call it almost like devilish like monster of sorts. And we end up having it to where this girl can run really fast and stuff like that. So we end up having it to where it seems like this girl, this track star, ultimately seemingly knows a lot more answers, quite possibly. And so we end up having it to where Claire slips into Shunichi, and we have it to where Claire seems to have the combat skill where Shunichi has the power. So we end up having it to where Claire ends up going and just starts beating the living crap out of this girl. Otherwise, just kind of breaking her limbs and ultimately just kind of flinging her around. We eventually find out that seemingly uh, that the mascot evidently has a gun holster, and so we end up finding out that this monster bizarrely has a gun. So we end up having it to where Claire easily pulls the trigger on this track star monster because it seems that this track star is a threat, and ultimately Claire ends up taking her out, and really just Shunichi is just traumatized by this whole thing of just like, oh my god, like she's killing people without even thinking. Like to her, like murder is just as easily as breathing. Like Shunichi is kind of weighing the pros and cons, but not Claire. We ultimately find out that it seems that Shunichi and Claire seemingly have a like a shared sense of body. It seems that that Claire can control things a lot better, but it also seems like Shunichi can seemingly be able to perform tasks and stuff like that. So it seems like there is a shared consciousness of sorts, but it seems that mostly Claire is mostly the one kind of behind the wheel of this thing, and so I guess it could determine if, I guess at some point, if Claire was to be incapacitated at some point, then Shunichi could kind of jump in and just kind of help, or vice versa, kind of thing, is what I'm assessing is probably going to happen at some point. So when going into here, we end up having it seemingly where we end up finding out that Claire ultimately has a sister with a backstory, and it seems that the main goal is to ultimately have Shunichi and Claire find Claire's sister. So, because we end up finding out that seemingly Claire's sister ultimately is seemingly turning into some, or had turned into some monster herself, and so we end up having it to where Claire and Shunichi, as mascot, are going in and investigating what is to come out of this, what is to come out of finding this girl. I mean, so we end up having it to where right away, bizarrely, they end up finding this girl, and we end up having Claire, who's just like, well, like, I guess she's not really my sister anymore, so I'm going to shoot her. And we have it to where Shinichi's like, no, like, let's wait up a minute. Like, maybe, maybe we don't have to pull the trigger right away. And Claire ultimately almost shoots, her sister in the head. We end up having it to where this girl ends up transforming into this, like I would call it like shadowish or static-ish like character that ultimately seems to go and go right behind this mascot and ultimately kind of hold him and ultimately just say like, oh, hey, I guess I need to explain some things. I've never seen another one of these kinds of things before. So we end up having it to where bizarrely that Claire's sisters immediately say it's like, oh, well, you're probably here to kill me, so how about we go to a place less public? So ultimately, like, if you are to kill me, no one can ultimately see uh, the blood and the carnage. So we end up having it to where bizarrely Claire's sister is walking off and the mascot is following her. We have it to where Shinichi is ultimately saying like, wow, this is very different than what Claire had described. And so we eventually seemingly have it to where Claire is not talking one iota, and ultimately we have it to where it's like, well, was Claire fabricating her story? Like, I'm kind of wondering, like, if Claire could really be trusted at this point. Like, I think Claire has been so shady within 3 episodes of time. I'm just like, you know what? Like, I think Claire is probably going to take advantage of Shinichi, and plus, I'm also thinking she's using her body in one way or another to ultimately just get like uh, like Shunichi to just do whatever she wants. Ultimately, it seems like Shunichi is a very shy boy, and we have it to where I think Claire is ultimately taking advantage of that, knowing full well that it's like, well, like, hey, we need to be partners, and but there is one really interesting moment that I really did enjoy, where we have it to where, like, it's seemingly that uh, they weren't meant to find the monster of which to go on their mission. It seems that they were going to go out to the movies, and we have it to ultimately, like, Claire was like, well, like, since we're now like connected, like, we now, like, I now want to do like everything with you now. And so we end up having it to where Claire immediately is like, well, we're going to have to go to the movies now, like, together. And she ultimately says, like, hopefully whatever you bring me to isn't a horror movie, because ultimately I don't like those. And so ultimately we have to Shunichi and Claire end up going to the movies to eventually stumble upon their way into Shunichi ending up forcibly in the middle of public, ending up transforming into this monster, and ultimately we have it to where eventually that is to lead us to Claire's sister, I believe. So right now, it's a lot of interesting things going on here. Like I said, uh, we kind of have Shunichi being like this Ghost Rider Esh like character. I mean that in the way of which is when it seems that, like, for an example, like, Ghost Rider would change from Johnny Blaze to Ghost Rider because he would know that someone is guilty, or smell the blood of the innocent, and that is what to ultimately force him to change from Johnny Blaze to this Ghost Rider character that ultimately is a superhero of sorts, or quite possible an anti-hero, because he'll just eventually just attack anybody that's in his way, kind of thing. So going into this so far, I'm really enjoying the episodes. Again, I can't wait for this to kind of like pick up more. Like, I wish that there was kind of more going on in here, but I'm kind of enjoying the simplicity of these episodes, and I'm kind of liking the fact that this like had just been quickly becoming a show that all of a sudden just turns into uh, like two people all of a sudden just become one, and then they're basically just like, well, hey, like, we have to like hang out together, we have to like at first, like, it's some weird connection between between the two of them, and we have it to where Claire is ultimately just using her wilds to otherwise get Shunichi to do whatever she wants, but when looking at it, uh, we have it to her also that Claire is enamored with this mascotted character, and yeah, so I just thought it was a really interesting show so far, and it'll be interesting to see where they go with this. Like, it'll be interesting to see like what they develop with this character, as far as the mascot, but also as far as just where this story eventually goes into, how they give us all the answers and peddle all that out. So without a doubt, I think that's all I wanted to say about these first three episodes. There might have been some stuff that I kind of rushed through or didn't go too much into detail on. But other than that, I think I'm going to call it a wrap for this review. I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.